finished up the morning run. Now it's time to cook some breakfast. The run went great. I ran with my homie Brandon. I've been running with him once or twice a week for about probably a little over a year and a half now. And back in the day, I used to be so anti-running. I hated running. I would make a bunch of videos about how running is like the worst form of conditioning you can do as a grappling athlete. And I definitely don't think that everybody needs to run 10 miles every single day if you're a grappling athlete. But I will say one thing that I have changed my mind on and have learned is that I definitely think that every grappling athlete should have the athletic capability and capacity to run at least a little bit. Now, you don't need to run a half marathon. You don't need to run for an hour multiple times a week, especially if you're doing a ton of jiu-jitsu training already, because that's where most of your conditioning stimulus is going to come from, is the time spent on the mat. But I will say, spending over a year now running about once, maybe twice a week at a minimum of 30 minutes up to about 60 minutes, I've seen some pretty amazing improvements in my athleticism. Obviously, my conditioning has improved, and just my ability to run has improved. And I think if you're an athlete, whether you lean really heavy on the jiu-jitsu side of things or whether you kind of lean a little bit heavier on, no pun intended, on the lifting side of things, regardless of where you are on what you prioritize most, you should be able to do at least a little bit of running if you want to be a more well-rounded athlete. So this morning I ran with Brandon. We ran about 4 miles. There's a running trail by his place. And so we ran about 4 miles. I don't know the paces, so I'll put up a screenshot of my paces for this run. I'm not even really trying to like match any pace. I'm just trying to keep up with Brandon, because Brandon, he's actually a really strong runner. He's ran marathons or a marathon, triathlons, half marathons, ran cross country. So he's freaking fast, and it's hard for me to keep up a lot of the times. I'm getting a little bit better, but it can still be a challenge for me to keep up. So I really just go off of whatever his paces are. You could say it's zone 2. I don't really think it's technically zone 2 training for me, probably zone 2 training for him. My heart rate is a little bit higher, but it's not super intense. I am still trying to work on building that aerobic base of conditioning with these runs. I will say I try as much as I can to focus on nasal breathing in and out of my nose the entire time. And then we are kind of talking a little bit. So it's not exclusively nasal breathing, but when he's talking, I'm working on nasal breathing. And of course, you know, when I'm talking, I'm exhaling out of my mouth a little bit more. But that's basically the format I've been using for the last year. Just 1, maybe 2 runs a week, anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes, depending on how I'm feeling. A little bit later, I'll go over some of the post-run recovery stuff that I do, because one thing I've struggled with over this last year of running every week is that my ankles and my Achilles get pretty chewed up, especially if I'm not doing all the necessary care for my feet, my ankles, and my knees. And I don't think that it's not like a bad thing. It's just part of the fact that like I took a long time off of running. I took probably 5 years, 6 years off of running consistently. I used to run all the time when I was wrestling in high school, and then once I stopped wrestling in high school, I was like, forget that, I'm done running. And I didn't pick it back up until last year. So there's still a lot of stuff that I'm working on to try to take care of some of those tissues that, you know, just aren't fully developed to be able to run hard, run a lot, and recover very quickly. It's kind of like the first time maybe you've done a lot of jiu-jitsu, but you've never really lifted before. You may be sore after every workout for quite a while as you're kind of getting used and your body's adapting to the stressors of lifting. I feel like I'm still adapting to some of the stressors of running. But all in all, it's been a net positive. I really enjoy it. Surprisingly, I used to hate running, but now I actually kind of enjoy running. And it's all in all, I'd say it's been a net positive. So I think this pan is getting hot enough for breakfast, our post-run meal. We got 3 farm fresh eggs from my aunt's farm. Gonna have a little bit of oatmeal with some protein mixed in there. Gonna throw in some Greek yogurt for some healthy probiotics. Not in the oatmeal, but just in this meal, we're gonna have some Greek yogurt. And then of course, we're always gonna chase it down with some more espresso, get a little bit of caffeine for the day. And then basically after the races with work, got some fun stuff that I'm cooking up with the strength matrix, some things that I'm working on as far as just trying to kind of go through this process of company rebranding to make sure that our messaging and our marketing is super clear, so that way we can really reach the grappling athletes that need us most and further help them improve their ability to lift heavy, roll hard, enhance their athleticism, so that way they can be successful in all areas of life, not just what they do on the mat or in the gym, but in every area of life. So that's what we got coming up right now, and I'll probably catch you guys during work. This is the final product, what we cooked up: 3 farm fresh eggs, 1 packet of maple brown sugar instant oatmeal. You guys already know that maple brown sugar is the best flavor. Also dropped 1 scoop of protein in there. Then we also got our 1/3 cup of fat-free Greek yogurt, which brings the macros for this meal out to 40 grams of carbs, 23 grams of fat, 51 grams of protein. Pretty solid for a post-run meal. Now it's time to grub this down, then make our coffee, then get to work. After a full day of work, we went off to Jiu Jitsu to get some no-gi training in. I'm working with my homie James here. James and I have been training together since we were both white belts. And I guess I was probably 7 or 8 years ago when I first started training with James. James is a great training partner. He's always super helpful and down to do these constraint-based games. He's crazy long and has a pretty awesome guard. So he's a real tough training partner. The rules for this game, or at least I'll start with the intentions. The intentions of this game are to work on controlling both sides of the hips once you have chest to back control. And then for the defensive player, the intention is to improve the skill of basically removing your back from their chest and getting back to a position where you can face your training partner or your opponent. So here are the rules of the game. Offensive player starts on the back with no hooks in, just arms extended, and they can start with whatever upper body grips they want. Once they go live, the goal for the offensive player is to cover both sides of the hips while maintaining chest to back control. That could be both hooks, a body triangle, just a shin across the hips, any sort of connection or control that covers both sides of the hips while maintaining chest to back control. Goal for the defensive player is to turn and face the offensive player and get their knees in between both hips or completely detach from the offensive player. So you can see here that James is doing a really good job. He's protecting his hips pretty much at all times. I can usually get one hook, but James does a really good job of trapping or blocking the other hip. I have a Kimura grip right here. I'm looking to try to continue to get to the chest to back, end up having to come into mount. That's the end of that game. I think based on the rules of the game, we could have kept going, but it's all good. We end up just resetting and going again. So now James is on my back. He starts with no hooks, but he can have whatever upper body grips he wants. So he's starting with a seatbelt, no hooks. Again, my win condition is to try to turn and face James or completely detach from him. And if I turn and face him, I also got to make sure I get my knees in between both of our own hips. James, his win condition is to try to cover both sides of my hips while maintaining chest to back control. So he has a real strong seatbelt here. I'm trying to, keep one leg over the top of his thigh to prevent that top leg from coming up and over and creating a hook. Once I lose that position, I try to post on the thigh, try to block it a little bit more. It's real hard to see from this position, but I'm trying to keep myself balled up, use my thighs to kind of protect access to my hips as I try to start scraping my back to the floor. If I can scrape and get both shoulder blades to the floor, I can usually create a good scramble, try to continue to create some space, turn and face James. But James did a great job of following. Thought I was out of there. Not quite. So now we're back to the same game plan. Try to continuing to scrape my body away. And now I was able to create a little bit of distance. I could turn and face him. get both knees in between her hips, and that's a win for me. So now we reset. I'm starting on James' back, no hooks. This time I'm going for a 2-on-1 wrist control. And now my goal is to try to cover both sides of James' hips. It's good to train with different sized training partners. I get questions on Instagram sometimes about people saying, "Oh, everyone in my jiu-jitsu class is way bigger than me," or "I have trouble rolling with bigger guys," and that's totally okay. Like, get exposed to rolling with different bodies. A size discrepancy has its pros and its cons, and it's good to be able to implement the skills that you're developing against training partners of all sizes. People that are smaller than you, people that are bigger than you. Someone like James not only is bigger than me, like he's way taller, but he also has some serious length that is pretty difficult to deal with. So it's good to train with someone like James to get exposed to different types of bodies and different types of training styles, and continue to build those skills against a wide array of opponents. So I'm still working here, still trying to keep my hips protected, which James did a really good job of protecting or capturing one hook. But as he come up, I was able to pull my knees in between our hips. I was able to get back to some sort of guard position. A lot of people, at least I've seen in some comments on Instagram and even some comments on YouTube, and they look at these constraint-based games or look at some of the constraints-led approach, they often just say, "Oh, this is just positional training. Oh, this is just positional sparring." And it may look like that. However, positional sparring would be you just get into a certain position and then you say go, and then you go live, and that's it. There's not really any direction. There's not really intent behind it. There's not very much direction on what specific skills you're trying to develop. That can have benefit at certain points. It's not necessarily a bad thing. But what I really like about these constraint-based games is that every game, or at least depending on how you structure it, is based around improving a specific skill, or based around improving a certain ability, or developing the capacity to do a certain skill over and over and over again. And what I like about that is that I think that has a little bit more validity and maybe even a little bit more benefit for long-term progress than just starting in a position and just saying go and just going nuts and trying to mess each other up and tap each other out from just a random position. So now I'm rolling with my friend Nick here. Nick is hands down one of my toughest training partners in the room. I don't think I've ever seen him get tired, ever. He's super, super tough. His scrambles are crazy. He's constantly moving. He's a really good training partner. Someone like James has a lot of really good static control. So it seems like once James gets a good grip, it's really hard for me to break his grips. If I'm in top position and I'm trying to pass James's guard, James does a really good job of slowing me down and kind of holding me in a static position as he starts to work towards my back or work towards different sweeps. Nick, on the other hand, he also has a really, really dangerous game that gives me a lot of trouble. However, instead of it being more static based, it's very dynamic. There's a lot of movement, a lot of scrambles, and so it's good to train with both of these guys to work on the skills of maintaining chest to back contact, trying to cover both sides of the hips against someone like James, who is much more static, has really strong grips, really strong positions, and someone like Nick, who's constantly moving, constantly creating openings and scrambles and all that good stuff. So the rules of this game are the same that I did with James. I pretty much did this game the entire training session. Usually when I have a specific skill that I want to develop, I go into that training session with one game in mind, and I basically just run that game with as many training partners as I can. So I ran it with James, now I'm doing it with Nick. Again, my win condition or my focus is to try to either completely detach from Nick or at the very least face Nick and get both of my knees in between our hips. So I'm able to face him here, and now I was able to create a position where I got both of my knees in. If I'm on the back, or whoever's the offensive player, their intention or their win condition and their focus is to maintain chest to back control and cover both sides of the hips. And so one thing I've played around with over the course of this training session was trying a bunch of different grips. Sometimes I'd do a 2-on-1 wrist control. Sometimes I would do a 1-to-1 wrist control. Sometimes I would do a seatbelt. Sometimes I would do a body lock. And I think John Danaher talks about this in some of his instructionals, the importance of maintaining diagonal control, where you're able to stop your opponent from twisting and turning away. I realized that big time when doing this game. If I had a 2-on-1 wrist control, that was great because that somewhat prevents some of the, it kind of is like a form of diagonal control a little bit. At least you prevent them a little bit from twisting. But if I just had a body lock, or I just had double underhooks and no way to prevent the defensive person from turning, it was really, really tough to be able to stop them from turning and scraping their back to the floor, either creating a scramble and getting away, or at least just, completely escaping the position altogether. So there's a great example of some of Nick's great scramble ability. Even if he loses a position, or even if I start to escape some of the position, I'm definitely not out of dodge. I'm definitely not safe. I got to keep working, making sure that I establish good defensive positions by getting my knees in between us or both of our hips. Now I'm starting on Nick's back, and I think that's the timer right there. So, actually that wasn't the timer. I think I got a body triangle or covered both sides of the hips. I should be paying more attention when doing these voiceovers. So getting a little out of frame here, but the other thing that I like about these these constraint-based games, even I still sometimes call them situational sparring or situational drill or situational live goes. One thing that I really like about these constraint-based games is that you get so much work done in such a short period of time. And to me, it feels like my training density has increased a ton because I'm spending more time getting in these, different positions, focusing on developing different skills in these different positions. And I feel like I've just made so much faster progress over the last 2 years of working these constraint-based games than probably the 6 years of just regular sparring that I was doing before. And that doesn't mean that I don't ever do regular sparring. The way I typically structure this is, and I don't know if I mentioned this in the last vlog or not, but the way I typically structure these constraint-based games is I go in for I treat it like a 3-week phase of training. So for 3 weeks, I want to work on one specific skill, or maybe 2 at the very most specific skills. So for this week and last week, it was all about attacking and maintaining control of the back, as well as attacking and maintaining control of mount. So later in the week, I'll show you guys some videos. I did the same game, or a very similar game, with James and Nick from mount position. And so now I'm rolling with my homie Nando. Nando is he's a college wrestler, super, super tough. I'm actually one of my older training partners, Anthony, is his brother. Anthony's a black belt. Nando's a college wrestler. He's been doing some no-gi with us. He's super tough. He has great scrambles. And anytime you train with a wrestler, it's good. It's just a good wake-up call because I wrestled for a long time. I think Nando's wrestled much longer than I have, but there's a certain squirreliness and a certain ability that wrestlers have where they can just move in just all these weird ways. They can be really tricky to control. So with Nando, I noticed big time that there's a huge importance of creating some sort of diagonal control and really trying to use that to try to stay connected to him as much as possible as a work to try to control both sides of his hips. So now he's on my back here. Even though I have some little bit more jiu-jitsu experience than he does, his wrestling ability is still paid off and just helping him have a decent amount of grappling skills. I think a lot of times people think that wrestling and jiu-jitsu are kind of two opposing ends, and there aren't a whole lot of similarities between the two, but I think there's more similarities between them than we initially think. I think wrestlers can do a great job and have a lot to bring to the table when it comes to, jiu-jitsu, and I believe the reverse is also true. I think jiu-jitsu, or at least no-gi jiu-jitsu focused grapplers, I'll say, have a lot to bring to the table to help improve the grappling ability of wrestlers as well. So it's good to train with people from different disciplines. I haven't wrestled in a really, really long time, but I do have some training partners who are great wrestlers, so it's good to just get a good mix of people who have only done jiu-jitsu, people who have done a mix of jiu-jitsu and wrestling, and people who have primarily just done wrestling, someone like Nando. So we're resetting here. You'll see just how fast, as soon as we get started, like I'm immediately trying, as quickly as I can, trying to find a way to get control of those hips. And Nando's really, really tough. He keeps moving from side to side. You can see how he really gets his hips out and away. And this is crazy too. He kind of did like a reverse can opener on me to get out of that position. But one thing I noticed with Nando, that as soon as we get started, you'll see that I kind of choose to back into my training partners a lot as soon as this game starts and pull my knees to my chest. I noticed that Nando, he really starts to like slip down and almost try to get his hips as far away as possible, which kind of makes a lot of sense, right? Like if you don't want someone controlling your hips, you make your hips as far away from them as you can. It makes it a little bit harder for them to control. Obviously, depending on how you do that, you got to make sure that you're not leaving yourself open to, if you slip down too far and you let them get a leg over your shoulder and set up different types of triangles from the back and things like that, you definitely have to look out for those. But you know, it's definitely a good thought to keep in mind. I think I don't know if I do end up getting it here. Yeah. So Nando and I actually did 2 rounds on this training day. I'll admit, the first game that we did, or the first round, which was 6 minutes, I think I got him quite a bit. And then his ability to learn from one game, or the first round, to the second round, he absolutely crushed it. You guys will see here in a minute. I don't think I controlled his hips even once the second time we played the game. He catches on really quick. He's a fast learner, good training partner. So the different grips that I was working through and kind of cycling through on this game was I was using a lot of 2-on-1 grips. I would use 1-to-1 wrist control. I pretty much tried to do every combination of grip that I could think of that wasn't a seatbelt. The seatbelt position is great, but I found just for me, sometimes like in the middle of a scramble, I'm trying to pass someone's guard. I end up threatening the guard pass, they turtle. I don't always just immediately land in the perfect position with a seatbelt. Sometimes I only have one wrist control and like a grip on their trap, or maybe I am in like a more traditional turtle position where I have one arm draped across their lower back, and maybe I'm reaching for that far wrist, but I don't necessarily have like a perfect seatbelt position. So I tried to work on starting from as many different grip positions as I could without starting in a seatbelt. So you can see here I started with 2 underhooks, no grips on Nando. Nando's doing a great job of hand fighting. You can see I was trying to, continue to scoot his hips away, create space, make it really difficult for me to try to control his hips with my hooks. And I think I do end up going for a seatbelt position here, or this is more like a body lock, gut wrench position. Nando's doing a great job scooting his hips away, creating height when he needs to. That he ends up kind of getting into a little bit of a tripod position, shucks me off, does a great job. All right, now he's starting on my back. He is going for far arm or far wrist and an elbow. Classic wrestling position there. One of the weirdest things about folk style wrestling, which I don't understand, is the locking hands rule. I remember when I first started wrestling, I was thinking like, we're not allowed to lock our hands once we hit the floor? Like, that's like the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. And some people say like, oh, if you just lock your hands, it's stalling. And I think like, so what? Like, if you lock your hands and someone can't get away, like, that's their problem. That's not my problem. So, I don't know. I've always thought that rule was stupid. If you've done folk style wrestling, let me know what you think in the comments if you think that the locking hands rule is dumb. There are a lot of rules in wrestling that I think are dumb, but biggest one being the locking hands rule. So like I said, this is the second round that Nando and I were doing together. Nando is super tough. He caught on and learns really, really fast. I don't think I was able to cover his hips at all this second round. I'm really trying here. Now we're in a more traditional wrestling position. Try to pull him into my lap a little bit. I get one hook. Try coming over the top for the second hook. I start sliding off a little bit. I think I try to use a little bit of a, or no, I was going to say, I think I go for a power half here, but I can see I still have same side wrist control. He does a good job kind of turtling up, blocking his hips. And yeah, I end up sliding off the hips there. I will say these games, even if you like lose the game over and over and over again, it's great because you get more and more reps of failure. So you get, like, at least in my opinion, the way I like to think about it is you get exposed to the things that you're doing wrong more often. So it's a little bit easier to pick up on what you're doing wrong. So for example, if you were to just treat every single training round, like a running 6-minute clock, you just do a regular roll. If you get to someone's back, or you get chest to back connection, but you don't control both sides of the hips and they escape, it's all happening so fast, you may not remember exactly how you lost control of their back or exactly how they escaped. And then you have to work all the way back from the beginning again to try to get their back again. And if there's someone of comparable skill, that can happen like only a couple times a week. If you create some constraint-based games that allow you to kind of start in different positions and give very clear task focus and give very clear directions on what skills you're trying to develop, if you keep losing the game, you have all those data points to reflect back on and see, like, okay, what were the things that I was doing wrong? What were the things that kept happening or what were the commonalities on how I kept losing the back position? And for me, I'm already, as I'm watching this footage back, one of the things that I'm noticing is that it just got way too high over his shoulders. I think Nando did a great job, like I said earlier, of kind of scooting his hips away and keeping his hips far. I probably should have done a better job of trying to sag back a little bit and maybe sit a little bit lower on his back. Every time he would turn belly down and kind of get into more of that traditional referee's position, I was way high up on his back, and I didn't have control of both hooks, which meant I was usually sliding to one side or the other. So that's something that I will definitely have to work on in the future. All right, I think we're getting very close to the end of this training round. I think this is the last round of the day 2. Usually when I go for long runs in the morning, I try to take care of my ankles, my knees, my hips a little bit, because sometimes they can get a little toasted after a long run, and that usually helps me feel pretty good and have plenty of energy to roll hard later in the day. And that's the end of the training round. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys want to get access to a free Grappler Accelerator training program, just click the link in the description below. Lift heavy, roll hard. Catch y'all later. Peace.